Hi, everybody. I'm back. And this time I have a really interesting fellow with me. His name is Forrest Hagen. Please tell me I said that right, Forrest.
You got it right on.
Okay. And he was a member of the group that put on the Brain Conference. I'm not going to waste much time talking. What I want to do is have you hear Forrest talk. So, Forrest, first of all, can you start off? How did you hear, or how did you get involved with the Brain Conference?
Okay, it goes back to the period after Jack had had his stroke. And, I don't know that it was projected this way, but Jane convened a meeting at her house. And I think what she was trying to do is find any kind of activity because Jack was not very mobile at that point. She would like to have events at their home to keep Jack in the social circle. So amongst the people that on the invitation that Jane had sent out, she mentioned that one of the attendees was a woman who was now living in Camrose who had worked for ARBI. So I, so then that I'll explain how I got involved with ARBI, and I decided that I should attend that meeting because I'd had fairly long association with the ARBI organization in Calgary. And that dated back to very good friends of mine who the wife was a nurse in her working career, and she had volunteered at ARBI to help with stroke victims, et cetera, et cetera. And she would come home from her volunteer time at ARBI and explain to her husband that it was such a great organization. And he had made a lot of money in the oil business, and he was looking for a charity that he could, or a nonprofit that he could make a sizable donation to. So he met with ARBI, and he was convinced that ARBI was one of the most effective nonprofit organizations around, that their fundraising went directly to their programs and not to some third-party fundraising organization. So every time I would meet with him, he said, this is a pretty effective organization. You should consider donating to them as well. So for several years, I would make a much smaller donation than my friend did, but I would make an annual contribution, which I'm going to do again this year, to ARBI, to their continued operations.
And so what does ARBI stand for?
ARBI stands for the Association for the Rehabilitation of the Brain Injured.
Right on. So it was just a natural progression from ARBI to our Brain Conference.
Right. Well, and the whole initiative, it took a couple of years of different meetings of different sorts. I continued to go to ARBI and see what programs. It happens to be that the ARBI facility in Calgary is not far from downtown, west of downtown, and it's not far from where my daughter lives. So if I would come to Calgary, I would try to coordinate meetings to go and meet with the people at ARBI and see firsthand what programs that they had involved. One of which was I sat in on a group aphasia session, which is people that are having difficulty communicating and speaking. So I sat in on, and I would go to their annual Stampede breakfasts, and I would meet some of the clients that would come there, which was that was also a pretty interesting experience. I sat down, my friends that they had not yet arrived, so I had got my breakfast, and I sat down beside a couple, and started visiting with them, and they lived on an acreage north of Calgary. And the husband had had a stroke. And, it was amazing how the husband was not very communicative, but ended up chatting with his wife, and she was telling me about his stroke and that she was really striving to keep them on their acreage, but it was a huge amount of work for her. And I made the remark to her that in order to thrive after you've had a brain injury, you really need a loved one to there for your support, like you have Alvin. And that woman, she started to cry when I made that comment, because I don't think she was getting much appreciation from her husband, but she was putting in a huge amount of effort in order to support her husband in their home environment and not having to move into a facility. So
I know, like, there's times I seem to forget how much effort Alvin puts in. And I mean, he puts in tons and tons. I have absolutely no complaints. And, sometimes I kind of feel sorry for the poor guy, but he's a godsend, really.
Right. Well, in the case of this couple that I visited, and the wife has early onset Alzheimer's, and his wife is still healthy enough that she could go for a walk. So she took the dog for a walk while I was there, and he and I had an opportunity to sit down and have kind of a one-on-one conversation between two guys. And I just said, there's not much you can do for her. She seems to be deteriorating, but you need all the support from your friends that you can possibly get. And I think you really appreciated that. You've got to make sure that you stay in touch with those people and make sure that they know that they're not isolated. And I know he's got a fairly big support group, but one more doesn't hurt. So
absolutely. Like, excuse me. We are so lucky because our two sons, one lives an hour and a half away in Hardisty, and the other one is 15 minutes away in Tofield. And I mean, they're not here all the time, but they are so supportive. Like, it means a huge thing to both Alvin and to myself too. But okay, I'm going to ask you about something else. So then you went to this meeting with Jane, and the group of you started talking and eventually developed this idea of the brain conference, which incidentally I thought was great. Now, in addition, I want to ask you, you have an ecotourism business of your own as well. Am I correct?
that's correct, yes.
Tell me about it.
Well, I guess the easiest way to present it, I'm really interested in the landscape that I live in. And I was very fortunate to have parents that acquired some very interesting pieces of land. And then I'll couple that with having made discoveries, archaeological discoveries, or like finding certain native sites, teepee rings and fireplaces and whatever, and finding dinosaur fossils on 3 different parcels of my land. I was able to get the attention, I don't know if that's the right word, but the Tyrrell Museum have been out and investigated 2 of the 3 sites on my land. I got to know the now deceased curator of archaeology from the provincial museum. So, I had access to a lot of professional people that I was able to share some of these sites that are on my property. And in particular, the fellow from the provincial museum, Jack Brink, who was the curator of archaeology at the museum, he loved coming out here and, tramping around the land. And, he didn't always agree with some of the things that I would find, but, he had expertise, and he could validate certain things that I found. And then most recently, I've had involvement with the Reynolds Museum. So, 3 important provincial organizations that are interested in the same things that I'm interested in this community. So it just seemed like the right thing to do was to offer, tours. I charge for tours, but I take people on maybe a 2-hour tour and show them all the interesting features and artifacts and whatever that have been found on this land and in the area. So
That's pretty awesome. You also have accommodations out there as well.
I have two cabins. One is a converted, renovated threshing bunkhouse. It's on wheels, and again, that was something that my father had acquired, and I had parked it in a place that it didn't get destroyed, and I had a revelation that would make a nice piece of accommodation. And between my son and I, we renovated into a space that has it's got a double bed in the back of it, and it's got a table and chairs, and a place for you to wash your hands. And it's outside. There's a canopy and a retractable canopy, so you can place to sit under, and a fire pit, and it overlooks the Battle River Valley. So it's from that site, you have access to walk down along the river and some beautiful scenery. So
that kind of sounds like a little piece of heaven, right?
It is a great spot. It really is. I enjoy it. And there's lots of wildlife out here. Last Friday morning, I was driving into my driveway. I'd been out checking something out, and there was a cocked pheasant, ringneck pheasant, running down my driveway. And I've talked to my neighbors, and we've all kind of concur that we have not seen a pheasant in this area for 15 to 20 years. So hopefully, pheasants are making a comeback, because when I was a youngster, there were lots of pheasants in this area.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I'm not a hunter, but I have lots of interesting land that people like to hunt on, and I do let my neighbors go on and hunt. I don't like them driving on my land, so I let them go in and walk. And but there's lots of wildlife in the area. I just filled my 3 bird feeders, and they hadn't had the kind of food that they liked in the bird feeders for a couple of days, and they seem to have abandoned me. But they'll be back before long.
Okay, and I'm guessing that you believe in the healing power of nature.
Pardon me, what was that?
In the healing power of nature.
Oh, of course, yeah. I believe our world is racing too fast, and especially if I listen to lots of podcasts, here's lots of comments about artificial intelligence, and I think we're going to be very fortunate to live where we do, that we don't have surveillance cameras on us all the time, and we can go out for a walk and not feel threatened or imposed. So I think we live in a wonderful part of the world, undiscovered, but it's not crowded, but it's very interesting.
You know what? I think you're right. Anyway, um, I'm looking at my notes here because I never do anything unless I have notes. So, if people want to contact you, if they're more interested um, in perhaps coming out or speaking with you, how can they contact you?
Well, I have a website, and my farm name or my tourism business name is called La Prairieaire. And La Prairieaire is a really, really hard word to spell. So rather than so I set up a second domain name called LP EcoTours, which the LP is for La Prairieaire. But then you can go on to lpecotours.ca and you can see some of the things that inspire me and opportunity to come out and tramp the land with me. So be great to have people come.
So, how did you derive the name La Prairieaire?
You know that in my previous life, I I worked for an oil field service company in Calgary, and I did a lot of traveling. And I happened to be on one of my sales trips to Europe. I would make 3 or 4 trips to Europe. I would be gone about a month at a time, and you had lots of time to contemplate things. And my wife and I had made the decision that we were eventually going to move from Calgary back to the farm. So and so I out of the blue, I think maybe I was in France at the time, and I thought La Prairieaire. That sounds like an interesting name, so it stuck. And then my wife, when we did move up here, she had a, a sport horse breeding business, and she called her business La Prairieaire Warmbloods. So the Prairieaire name, and we're divorced now, although I communicate with her regularly. She's in Europe right now, and we communicated this morning. But she's got rid of her horses, and the domain name fell back to me. So it's La Prairieaire EcoTourism now is what it is, and not La Prairieaire Horses.
That's pretty awesome. Um, Forrest, if you had any, I don't know if I call it advice or words of wisdom for people, what would you say?
Well, I've been telling people what Norman Doidge says about the 5 things that people should practice in order to have healthy mental lives. And what were they? Get lots of sleep, good diet, don't drink, don't smoke, have 1 cup of coffee a day. I think those are pretty simple. Get lots of exercise, and I meditate every day, although I haven't done it today. And I find meditation is very helpful. So
I tend to agree with you. Meditation is very, very helpful. But I'm kind of glad that you mentioned Norman Doidge because he was our keynote speaker at the conference. And I'm sure that anyone who had the opportunity to hear him, and especially I liked when he showed the progress people have made who perhaps were not doing well before. I mean, he did have a video of a lady, I believe she was using a Pons machine. And when she started walking, she was kind of weaving and wobbling. when she was hooked up to that machine. Wow.
Right. And Synaptic in Calgary, which is an amazing organization, they have the ponds apparatus. So they're practicing it. And there's some great resources out there. And hopefully, I know that ARBI is very supportive of helping get a brain rehabilitation center established in Camrose. And I know that Wen from Synaptic, she's all over it too. I think she'd love to be part of supporting an organization to help us get off the ground with a facility in Camrose. So hopefully it happens.
You know what? With the kind of people we have involved, it's going to happen, right?
It will. Yeah. Now I was going to say one thing that, if you can't, I don't think Norman Deutsch has he doesn't have YouTube videos. He likes to keep that fairly close to the chest with him. But his books are excellent. He writes a great book. So if you don't have an opportunity to see him in person, his books are great. I think I read the one aborted from Jack and Jane, How to Change Your Mind, which is an amazing book.
And I totally agree with you. They're available on Amazon. And if you're kind of like me, kind of cheap, guess what? Amazon also has used books. So I bought 2 books. I bought both of them for the price of one new one. So there you go.
There you go. Good for you. Yeah.
Anyway, and Synaptic, I am checking them out in January.
Oh, good.
I'm going down for a week. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Forrest, thank you very much. I really appreciated talking to you today. And hey, it will not be long, I hope, before we have our own brain center in Camrose.
You've done a great job. You're a great disciple, Jocelyn. Oh. But it's been an amazing team that pulled it all together for sure.
I think it was. Anyway, I'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, Jocelyn.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, now it's stopped recording. So
okay, sounds great. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.